On this episode of Still Loading, it's a shame you have to sit on something that pretty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading Podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are continuing a very long overdue Naughty Dog series. Almost 2 years ago now, I started a series on Naughty Dog. I did a whole retrospective on their history and then turned that into individual episodes on their games. And we started with the Uncharted series, and we're pretty much done Naughty Dog's official entries into the Uncharted series. There are a couple games that Naughty Dog did not do, but with me, as usual for all the Uncharted games, is Tristan. So Tristan, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. We had some technical issues when we tried to record last week, so I'm glad I was able to figure that out and iron it all out. But I having you back on because, of course, we're talking about Naughty Dog, so I have to have you on for Naughty Dog games, for Uncharted games specifically, though I didn't have you on for Last of Us, so I apologize for that.
Hey, man, that's okay.
But Lost Legacy. So we're talking Uncharted Lost Legacy today, and it is a departure for the series because instead of focusing on Nathan Drake, we are focusing on Chloe Frazer, who is one of the main characters that you first meet in Uncharted 2. And you go through the adventure with her and another character named Nadine Ross, who you meet in Uncharted 4. So one of the interesting things about this, like I said, is that Nathan Drake is not a character. He doesn't even show up in this game. You do find out later that his brother Sam Drake, who you also meet in Uncharted 4, is in this game, but we'll get to that later. So before we dive in to talk about it, Tristan, what was your initial thoughts when you heard they were making an Uncharted game that didn't revolve around Drake?
You know, had it been revolving around any other character, I would have been a little more unsure about it. But, I love Chloe. I love her voice actor, and it's all good. So I was like, you know what? Sure, let's hit me up with a little bit of backstory into one of my favorite supporting characters, and we'll see how it goes.
And I believe Claudia Black, who is the voice of Chloe, is pretty much one of your voice actor crushes, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's one of the. She has one of those voices that it's usually a typical kind of British woman doing some cool shit, but I would say probably 4 out of 5 times I can be I'm pretty sure that's Claudia Black.
Well, she is Australian, so she's not British, but us Americans generally confuse those, I feel like.
That is true.
That we can. She was actually in the movie Pitch Black as well with Vin Diesel. I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I had just watched that a year or two ago, and I definitely did not know that she was in there prior to watching it. But surely I would have seen her and gone, "Oh man, it's Claudia Black."
This might require a rewatch then.
I might have to check that out again.
She plays Sharon Shaza Montgomery in Pitch Black. So there we go. That's wow. I did not know that. All right, good to know. I'll have to watch that movie again.
So she's one of the main characters in the later seasons of Stargate SG-1, and one of the main characters in, I think, all of Farscape. And
yes.
they actually had and then they had another Farscape character, the main guy, joined the SG-1 cast in season 7 or something. And they had a whole episode where it was a weird crossover thing where they were kind of playing their Farscape characters.
Mm-hmm.
That's just about all I remember from it, but I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Even though I wasn't a big Farscape fan, I knew just enough to get some of the jokes, and it's this is really cool. But
I remember you
anyway.
went on that whole binge of watching a lot of late 90s, mid 2000s sci-fi shows like Stargate SG-1 and whatnot. I should really watch more sci-fi stuff. I never really watch anything anymore.
Yeah,
but anyway, So Uncharted Lost Legacy. It focuses on Chloe Frazer, Claudia Black, your crush, and her and her partner in crime for this adventure is Nadine Ross, voiced by Laura Bailey. And the whole premise of the story is that Chloe is searching for the legendary Tusk of Ganesh, and Ganesh is the son of the Hindu god Shiva. And she recruits Nadine Ross because, once again, spoiler alerts for everything, just to be on the safe side. But her original partner got captured, by the villain of the game, Asav. And you find out later that that partner is Sam Drake, Nathan's brother. And I love Uncharted's history of constantly finding, hidden cities that you've never heard of before and bringing them to the forefront. I mean, I shouldn't say that you've never, but most people have heard of, Atlantis and Shambhala and El Dorado. And I know those were the first two games, but ever since Uncharted 3 with A Realm of the Pillars, and then in Uncharted 4 with Libertalia, and then in this one where they have, I forget what the name of the city is, but it was the city that was founded by the Hoysala Empire, which is the history that they use for reference in this game. And the other thing I really like, besides the fact that they introduce this, mythical city and whatnot, is the fact that, it has a much more personal connection in this game. The fact that you learn more about Chloe, and you learn a little bit about Nadine, though Nadine was an important character in Uncharted 4, but she didn't get a lot of screen time, if I remember correctly. It's not like you knew that much about her other than that she ran the evil mercenary group. Why can't I think of their fucking name?
Shoreline.
That's what it is. Other than she ran the evil mercenary group Shoreline. And what I like about this, though, is that you get so much more backstory about Chloe Fraser and about how her dad was the one who was searching for the Tusk of Ganesh, and he ends up getting killed because of it. He gets killed by bandits while searching for the Tusk. So Chloe kind of makes this her personal mission to do this again. What were your thoughts on the story, though? What was one of the things that stuck out to you, Tristan?
I definitely thought that it was cool that they had Nadine in this, because it's kind of like she fit kind of the Navarro type character from Uncharted 1, where it's just kind of or like Eddie Raja, where they're kind of interesting, but they're really just there to be in charge of the bad guys, and then they get killed off at some point.
Yeah.
So I liked that they brought her back to give her a little more depth, because in Uncharted 4, she was, by the end of it, she's like, listen, this is bullshit, and I went out on this job. And, her guys kind of betray her to stick with Wraith. So I really enjoyed that they added her in there. And then, yeah, the kind of personal touch you get from Chloe's backstory actually kind of reminds me a lot of Drake in Uncharted 1 and 3. Because in 1, it's you're finding Sir Francis Drake's coffin or whatever, and figuring out all the shit that he did on that island, and then you get the little backstory of him being a kid, and they're their mom did all sorts of research into that kind of stuff in Uncharted 4, but in 3 he finds all the other stuff. And anyway, it's just he has that kind of personal connection to those stories. So it was cool to see them do the same thing with Chloe in this story. I think even more so considering that her father kind of died for it, and that it's her actual kind of culture, where I would say, based on her accent, I would say, and I'm pretty sure they talk about where she grew up, where she's originally from India, but then were they in Australia at some point?
I honestly can't remember. You know what? Let me double check it real quick.
But so I'll just continue while you're looking that
up. Chloe is of Indian ancestry on her father's side and was brought up in Australia, hence, Claudia Black's voice. So that makes a lot of sense. So she's of Indian She's of Indian ancestry, but she was still raised in Australia, and her father was Indian before and her father is Indian.
He was no longer Indian after he died. But yeah, so it was that kind of delving into a side of her that we really didn't get a whole lot of, and it seems like it's kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
almost like a story of rediscovery for her, because like she knows the stuff, but maybe hasn't been back to India in a long time. So
Yep.
yeah, I mean the story itself with the whole kind of like civil war and then like the freedom fighters like on one side and then Assad on the other and like that kind of stuff I feel like didn't really sink in too much until the very end.
Yeah, it's kind of it feels a lot more personal with between them and Assad versus them and like the whole freedom fighter narrative is definitely just kind of a backdrop, excuse me, to give Assad a reason to be such an asshole.
Right. Because like I think in the first like couple levels, you're in the city that's like half on fire and there's like jets flying overhead. So
Mm-hmm.
that gives you that kind of impression that they're like, oh, there's like some actual stakes with like war going on here. But I feel like I didn't get as much of an impact as I did in like Uncharted 2 with Lazarevich going around and like, Elena's been covering him for months and she's being her investigative reporter self and they're running through the city that's getting like blown apart by attack helicopters and shit. Like it didn't quite have that much like screen time devoted to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like that bit of the story kind of fell flat by the end because it was like, I mean, I don't know how into the plot we want to get right at the beginning, but the thing that he was after, it was like, oh, that was just for the Civil War. Okay, I guess that's a thing he could have done.
Yeah, and it just kind of like they do kind of play it up a bit towards the end, in that they make him into more of a hypocrite than you actually anticipated. Because, like you said, you at first think that he's doing this all for the Civil War for him to get more power, but he's hiding under the guise that this is for his heritage, and he's descendant of Hoysala, and he was a descendant of the Hoysala king, so he deserves this.
Hmm.
I also thought it was cool that Nadine kind of gets a bit of a redemption arc in this too, because she has a chance to kind of get Shoreline back in a sense, because Shoreline is hired by Asav. Asav pretty much is working with him. Those are the mercenaries he hires to help him get the Tusk of Ganesh. And once Nadine sees that, she's all the more committed to it. And she kind of has this payoff at the end where she's like, you know what? I don't need Shoreline. I don't need this lifestyle. I don't want it anymore. So she kind of, I like that both her and Chloe grow, because Chloe kind of learns a little bit more about kind of how to deal with people and not blow people off. You see that in the falling out that her and Nadine have later on in the game. And Nadine learns more how to kind of let the past be the past and move on.
Hmm. Like between her and Sam.
Between her and Sam, between her and Shoreline, yeah, I maybe even extent her father, because her father created Shoreline.
Hmm.
Um, I think more than most other Uncharted games, I thought this game had a really good character arc. Like all the characters had these really good arcs, with the exception of Sam. But even him, he comes in at the very end, so it's not like he is the main character, and he's not even that much of a supporting character. He's literally just there for comedic effect. That's his whole purpose. He's the comedian of the game.
Yeah, I think it's funny because at the end of Uncharted 4, when we're like, oh man, is this gonna be the end of Uncharted? Because like Nate has retired, or I mean, kind of not really, but like the dangerous treasure hunting stuff he's retired from.
Yeah, yeah.
And you see, Sam go talk to Sully, and it's like, oh, are we gonna get like a Sam and Sully game next? That could be cool.
Mm-hmm.
But they went in this direction instead, which, like, honestly, I think that's probably was the right way to go, considering kind of how old Sully is at this point.
Yeah.
But I definitely missed his like kind of playboy old man lines in this game.
Well, and like, and speaking of like kind of playful lines, the tagline that I used at the beginning of the episode is what Drake says to Chloe in Uncharted 2, I believe, right? I'm pretty sure that's where that quote comes from.
Yeah, yeah, and they're climbing up the
'Cause
ladder.
they're climbing up the ladder, and Drake's a little pervy, just to say the least. So the story overall, like I said, they're trying to get the Tusk of Ganesh, and Where I kind of like that the story isn't. The story is very simple, but I think it works for the gameplay because the first area of the game is a very open area where you kind of explore this field, this zone where you can go to multiple different spots, and you're trying to open up this giant door. And once you open the door, it's pretty much a straight shot to the end of the game, but you drive around in this Jeep in order to figure out where to go, to complete different objectives along the way. And then you can also, if you explore enough, you find this other temple that if you complete all of those temple's objectives, you can get a bracelet that will help you find the hidden treasures, excuse me, which I thought was a really nice touch because one of the toughest things about Uncharted is if you want to be a completionist, you're going to be spending a lot of time aimlessly wandering, searching for treasures, which you have done a lot, right?
Oh yeah, so I have opinions here. So I really liked the treasure system for the first three games because there's like it's a
Mm-hmm.
linear story and it's very much like you're going down a linear path. And if you look hard enough, you can usually find like, oh, there's like a thing I can climb on here that you just like normally run right past, and that kind of takes you up to like
Mm-hmm.
another secret room or something that has a treasure in it. And I loved that shit. Um, and then in Uncharted 4, when they introduced like these big open areas, I was just like, well, shit, do I need to like search this whole enormous empty field in case there might be a little shiny behind a tree or something?
Yep.
And it wasn't actually like that. It was more like, oh, you find like a shed or something that has like a little bit of environmental storytelling and there might be a treasure in there. But
Yeah.
initially when I thought that, it was like, oh, well this sucks. Like why should I even bother looking for all the treasures if it's going to take all the fun out of the game? And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like giving us an additional objective with like extra little puzzles and stuff for Chloe to do, which is fun on its own, and then adding the reward being a little gem that glows and makes a little sound whenever you're near a treasure in that big open area, that's like, ah, that's great. Way to fix my main problem with the treasure system from Uncharted 4.
Now, would you say though that you don't like it once you get back to the linear area, so that way it kind of ruins some of the exploration in those linear parts?
I mean, I don't remember if I kept it on or not, but there is an on-off switch in the menus. So if you think it's going to ruin it, you can still turn that off.
That is true. I forgot about the on-off switch. I just kept it on because I'm lazy.
Yeah,
I don't.
yeah.
I don't know how you have the stamina to do that because I can't, I don't have the energy or I don't have the determination to search for all those treasures. I've never 100%ed an Uncharted game because I don't feel like searching for 60 treasures or however many there are. I don't know how many there are in each game.
I think it's
But
60 in the first one, then it's like 100 in the next two.
dear God, that's just way too much effort. So yeah, you search around in India's Western Ghats, which I don't know if I'm even saying that correctly, but it's Ghats. And Chloe and Nadine follow the trail of several different towers, which is what we were talking about. And a lot of it is all linked back to the folklore of Ganesh and Shiva and the axe of Parashurama. And that the axe of Parashurama is the axe in Hindu folklore, or at least Hoysala folklore. I don't know if it's Hindu folklore or Hoysala folklore. I would assume it's Hindu because Shiva is a Hindu god. And Parashurama uses, or the axe of Parashurama is used to remove the tusk from Ganesh. And I'm actually like fascinated by like mythology, even though I seldom ever do any research on it. But I love that Uncharted also kind of explores these, less well known, or I should say less well known, at least in the States, in the Western world.
Yeah, it's cool that that Uncharted was kind of taking these less well-known folklore from, I guess
That's what I'm trying to say.
from the eastern lands that us Westerners don't really hear a lot of. Because like me
Yeah.
personally, that was my favorite thing in history in like middle and junior high school, was talking about like Greek, Roman, and Egyptian gods. Like I still eat that shit up between like God of War and Assassin's Creed and stuff. It's like I
Yes.
find that super interesting. But like the Indian gods, like I never really got into them. I'm not really sure why, but it's cool that I'm getting a little bit more oh, I can't think of the word. A little more exposure to that.
I agree. Like, I like that they have these new stories that you've never well, not new, because they've been told for like thousands of years, but new to us at least. And it makes me want to learn so much more about about Hindu culture and about Hindu religion and all that other stuff. And I love that they do that. It's the same thing that happened when they made Aram of the Pillars, or Ubar, in Uncharted 3. I was like, yo, there was an Atlantis of the Sands. And the whole Parashurama story kind of turns into almost like a very, not messianic type of folklore, but it's got a bit of a Christian vibe to it, only because that's my frame of reference. But you find out at the end of the game, towards the end of the game, that in the folklore that it wasn't a big fight between Parashurama and Ganesh. It was Ganesh willingly let Parashurama strike him, so that way it wouldn't dishonor Shiva or something like that. I don't know it all that well, but I remember seeing Chloe just in shock that that's what it actually was. And
right, like his,
and it was a good parallel to what was going on with Asav.
It wasn't that he had this great axe and like beat the shit out of the god with the tusks, whose name I forget right now.
Ganesh,
yeah. But it was that Ganesh was like, hey, if you don't beat the shit out of me with that axe that my father gave you, then it's gonna make my father look weak. So I'm gonna take the knee here, and you can go ahead and knock my tusk off to make it look like it's super powerful.
That's
just
what
for,
it was. That's
my
what it
father's
was.
honor type kind of thing.
Yeah, and I like that they kind of show bits of an interpretation of the mythology. Now, granted, I don't know if that's how exactly the story went. If that's what the original interpretation of that folklore from Hindu mythology, or that type of thing is, if that's actually how it went, or if that was just an interpretation by the game designers. But either way, I think it made the world feel that much more real when you're going through and exploring this world, and everything is pointing to Ganesh and pointing to Shiva and pointing to Parashurama. And a lot of the puzzles later on in the game, where you're trying to align shadows, and you're trying to move specific, a lot of the different towers, a lot of the different landmarks all kind of have that same feel of those three figures all kind of pointing to one central location. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the storyline, like I said, is relatively simple, just because that initial area is just all exploration. You're learning kind of through some very organic dialogue. I forget what, diegetic, I would say, almost diegetic dialogue as you're playing through the game. And Chloe and Nadine are talking. You learn more bits and pieces about the folklore and all this good stuff. And as you're exploring around, once you unlock that door, that big gate, and you can get into, or like what you believe is going to be Halabadu, which it turns out that it's not. Real quick, actually, the big legendary city in this one is actually Belor, not Halabadu, because the Tusk is in the older capital of Belor. And you find out that they created essentially like a fake Belor to lure the Persian army in, like the Hoysala did. And they hide the actual city in this massive underground cave. Like, when you see that thing, it is one of the most visually impressive things I've seen in a game. It just looks so stunning.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a lot of the ending bit in Atlantis of the Sand, where it's like kind of in the cave system.
Mm-hmm.
Like the earthquake knocking everything down is very similar.
But so once they figure out how to get to Belor, they do find the Tusk. They pretty much are forced, though. They get captured by Asav, the main villain of the game, and they are forced to basically do the rest of his dirty work for him. So once they get the Tusk, he just takes it, and then he leaves them there to die. And of course, in a typical villain mistake, he doesn't actually kill them. He tries to blow it up so that way they'll drown, instead of just shooting them like any normal villain would.
Right.
And they get out. And Chloe is able to get she has like basically a hairpin that she uses to pick the lock, and she rescues Nadine. And at that point, Sam Drake has also joined their party, and they've already had the whole falling out. Her and Nadine have had the falling out because she hates Sam Drake for the events of Uncharted 4. And they go out and they have to stop Asav. And they find out once they do catch up to Asav that he doesn't want the tusk. This is what we were talking about before. He doesn't want the tusk for himself. He wants it to buy a giant bomb so he can send the bomb into the city and quell whatever rebellion was left.
Right. Yeah, I think he was
losing at that point.
I think he was trying to incite more of a civil war to kind of like radicalize a lot of people that survived the blast and kind of blame it on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, because in previous, so let's. I mean, I guess a lot of the Uncharted games kind of had that same kind of bend to them, right? Where like the guy wanted El Dorado to be used as a weapon that he could sell to people.
Yeah.
In the second game, the guy whose name is escaping me right now.
It's oh my gosh, I can't think of the dude's name who's the villain in the second game either.
I said it earlier.
Lazarevich.
Yeah.
Lazarevich.
He wanted that because he's like, hey, this sap, it's not so much that I want like this big gem to sell. I want the sap to make me like a super soldier type of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in the third one, they're like, oh, well, this mythical gin is actually a neurotoxin that'll make people go crazy, and that's like perfect for their kind of shadowy organization to be doing their stealthy shit. So like there was always some kind of supernatural weapon bend, at least in the original 3. And then what I thought was interesting in the fourth one is that they kind of got rid of that supernatural bit and was just like, oh no, he just wants to find it for like fame and fortune. So it's kind of funny that they kept that through line of like, oh, we're not really doing supernatural stuff anymore, but we want to fall back onto the original 3 games where it's like, yeah, they're kind of a warlord who wants to do war things with it, and since it's not mythical, then he has to sell it to get a bomb, and it's like, eh. So I feel like that was kind of like the weakest part of the story. Honestly.
I didn't even put those two together. You're right. That is, they kind of wanted to walk that happy medium between. They can't have by him wanting selling the tusk for a bomb is literally selling away the idea of the supernatural elements of the Uncharted games that existed in Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. Well, 3 had it wasn't that supernatural. It was more of an hallucinogenic thing, but still.
Right.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. That is a very good point.
Because I guess they could have taken it as like, if they wanted to keep the supernatural stuff, they could be like, oh, well, we're looking for the axe, and the axe will give you like supernatural like leadership abilities or something, and like make everybody want to follow you or some shit. I don't know.
That would have been, yeah. It's weird because part of me does wish they kept the more supernatural stuff because I love that Indiana Jones vibe that the original games give. That's kind of what they're going for. Those original games were very Indiana Jones meets Tomb Raider meets, I don't know, Romancing of the Stone or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the latter ones, while they're still very Indiana Jones-esque, they do lose that supernatural flair. Like, I don't see anyone getting their heart pulled out and screaming Kali Ma like you see in Temple of Doom. I want to see something like, well, okay, maybe not the heart pulling out thing. That's still pretty gross. But I do wish they would bring it back if they're ever going to do another Uncharted game, maybe another spin-off or something like that. I would love to see them bring back the supernatural element to it. But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have always had mixed feelings about it. Like in the first game when they introduced like the weird zombie things, I was just like, wait, what? Like, I thought I was playing like a serious like treasure hunter game, and now there's like literal Nazi zombies that are coming at me. Like, what's going on? But like as the series has progressed, I guess I got used to it, and I do find it enjoyable. But there are times when Like in the third one specifically, where there's just like these weird drug trip times, or like a character will disappear around a corner that it's just like, all right. I mean, like I need some frame of reference, like some ceiling to the believability that I can kind of like root myself on.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but that actually leads me into another thing where you're saying, it was kind of a mix between like Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider. I feel like the main thing that distinguished Tomb Raider and Uncharted apart is that one was a chick and one was a dude. But now if you have Chloe taking up like the main character slot, how different
Mm-hmm.
is it really from Tomb Raider? I mean, like they're both women that have their fathers that like died during one of their little adventure things, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Chloe really comes from money or not, but there's definitely some similarities between her and Lara Croft.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I will say though they make her a lot more realistic proportion than the original Lara Croft, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
no,
more
there's
I'm more
definitely
comparing
a
to
lot
like
of
the
similarities.
the reimagining Tomb Raider, like the most recent three games, where she's like a little bit
Yeah,
more of
yeah.
a like an actual human being.
No, I guess you're right because if they kept it with Chloe, then it would just feel too much like Tomb Raider. I think that they needed Nadine in this to make it not feel like a Tomb Raider game. Granted, the gameplay styles are different enough that you can differentiate between Uncharted and between the Tomb Raider games, but at the same time, like from a macro standpoint, if someone who's never played these games before, they're going to look relatively the same just because it's these strong female characters going on rollicking adventures over that span over the world and whatnot.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I'd be curious to see who else they could add to it. Like maybe if they did, I don't know, like I don't know. I mean, they could introduce a new character. Like I think if they wanted to, they would have to like make a new game and introduce a new character and spin it off. Like have Nathan Drake come back or do like a prequel to Nathan Drake or something like that. Like have that actually you could do it. You could maybe do like a young Nathan Drake on one of his earliest adventures, but you don't play as him. You just kind of he fills the Nadine role and you play as someone completely different that you haven't met. Maybe playing as a young Sully.
Right. Yeah.
That would be kind of awesome actually. Playing as Sully and seeing what his adventures were,
I wouldn't be disappointed with that. That could be cool.
right? Because they set it up in Uncharted 3.
Right. Right. With
Uh,
the kind of like flashback type stuff.
mhm. Mhm. But okay, so let's wrap up the story quick though before we go into some of the differences in gameplay between Uncharted 4 and this one because that would be the most comparable, I would say. So the game ends with you see Asav giving the tusk to Orca, who is Nadine's former lieutenant, who now runs Shoreline, and that, like we said before, that's where Asav gets the bomb and he goes to blow up a city. So this is pretty much where they could decide to run away or go forward. They have the tusk. They were able to get it out, or they were able to get the tusk from Orca, basically just beating the shit out of him. I don't know if they kill him, but they definitely. I think he dies. I don't remember anymore.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they
But
shoot him.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, Sam saves her, allowing her to shoot Orca dead. So yeah, Orca pulls a gun on Nadine, and Sam saves her, allowing her to shoot Orca dead. So yeah, Orca gets killed. Thank God. What a name.
Hmm.
And and they get the tusk, so they could just walk away at this point. If they really wanted to, they could just peace out and not worry about it. But Chloe doesn't feel right about that, knowing that they're gonna if they got that tusk. Well, not even if that they got that tusk, and then hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people are going to die as a result of Asav's bomb. So then begins one of the craziest action segments in an Uncharted game that I remember playing. You commandeer a jeep and you just fucking drive. You fly up a lot. Like it's one of the craziest like off-roading segments. You have to stop periodically, kill a couple guys, get back in a jeep, and keep on going. And then you land on the train, and you have to fight your way up to the top of the train. So, what are your thoughts on this final sequence, Tristan?
Yeah, I think I think this was the one part that we kind of talked about last week. Okay, so this is like one of those areas that really felt like a greatest hits from
Mm-hmm.
the original four games, where it's like you're on a jeep, so that covers four. You're on a train, and that covers two. and there's other
Mm-hmm.
stuff that I assume would be from the first and third game, but you get the idea of what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, the first time I went through it, I thought it was really cool because I've always loved the train section in 2,
Yep.
and I liked that they still incorporated the Jeep, but not so much like in 4, where you were like just trying to get away from that big like tank type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found that one like kind of annoying because I kept getting like killed if you took a wrong turn or whatever. Um, so I feel like they kind of kept the best of each of those things and added a little bit more stakes to it since that was like the final battle basically. Um, but having gone back a second time, I just kind of found it annoying. Like
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even playing it on a high difficulty or anything. It was just like there'd be parts where it wasn't totally clear that I needed to jump off of the train onto a car. So I would just be kind of like trying to hide behind cover for like a weirdly long amount of time while cars like kept kind of coming up behind the cover and shooting me, and it was like, well, I have no clear indication as to what I'm supposed to be doing until Nadine would finally be like, maybe we should jump on a car.
Yeah. I remember I had a similar experience with that too. Like I thought the same thing. It doesn't really broadcast that specific moment very well. If yeah, I could see being frustrated by that.
Yeah, and there was, I think, just general things where it was kind of that, like, I don't know if this was specifically on the train or in one of the earlier sections where it's like you're kind of running and things are collapsing underneath you, and it's one of those kind of canned sections where it's like there's a particular thing you need to do, and it's mostly just running. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like, if like the other character gets in your way or if you stumble on like one of the chest high walls, then it's like, okay, well, I guess you're just dead now. Yeah, you know what? It was when the train's going off like the blown up bridge, and you're trying to run up and chuck the grappling hook up to Sam.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I think I died like 3 or 4 times on that spot because I tried to like jump and I'd bump into Nadine, and that would put me like 2 seconds behind.
Uh
And it was just like, this literally could have been just a cinematic, and like I don't know. Like I'm of two minds about that in general with the series, where it's like it's
I prefer the way they do it though. I think it makes it so much more intense when you have to run up it because even when it's doing that, like it that feels so much more intense than you just watching her run up it. You know what I mean?
right because you feel like you actually like, oh, yeah. In like a movie, you go, oh well, I mean obviously they're gonna survive, right? But in the game, it's like, oh
Yes,
well, maybe I'll screw up and they won't survive. So I guess in
exactly.
principle it's cool because it's more interactive, and you should do that because it's a video game, not a movie. Um, but for me in practice, it was just kind of like, I mean, can we just get to the part where they jump off of the train and survive, and where I don't have to get frustrated with running into stuff and not surviving because like it's the end of the game. Just let me end it, please.
So to kind of finish off the story before I actually have a couple thoughts about the difference. Like one of my some of my favorite gameplay moments, but the way the story ends is that they all just kind of after they make it out of that train alive, hopefully not jumping into Nadine and dying, they they jump to safety before the train falls and collapses and the bridge or the collapsed bridge and it explodes and it kills Asav. And actually, I will say the final fight's pretty awesome. But hold on, before I do that, my favorite joke is at the end of the game once they come out alive. They've saved the city from the bomb and they have the tusk. Sam is horrified to find out that Chloe plans on just giving the tusk to the ministry, or sorry, selling the tusk to the Ministry of Culture,
hmm
where they're not going to make nearly as much money as if they were going to sell it on the black market. But yeah, no. So some of my favorite gameplay elements. First off, to kind of start at the end and work back a bit, that final fight with Asav I think is fantastic. I find that so enjoyable, where it's just her and Nadine, Chloe and Nadine, just going back and forth, just beating the shit out of him, and it makes it feel so much more. Like that sense of teamwork is just so satisfying, at least in my opinion. What did you think of it?
So this is another case of the first time I played it. I completely agree with you. I thought it was super cool how you're both like kind of teaming up and like trading blows and everything with him. The second time through, I don't know if I wasn't reading his movements correctly or if I'm just like such a button masher that I wasn't getting the timing correct. But I felt
Mm-hmm.
like the majority of the time he was beating the shit out of me, which was significantly less fun.
Yes.
Still got
I
there, and it was still cool. It was just, again, like a little bit frustrating for me.
I could see that his like because they basically do quick time events for him without giving you any notification of when you need to hit it. It's all just visual cues, which is fine. It is a little bit difficult to master that or to get that timing down to something that you want it to be. So I found it the first time I played it, I struggled real hard with that. The second time I played it, which was just last week, it went a lot smoother for me. At least that's what I found. No, I like that final boss fight though. My second favorite, probably actually my most favorite, but like my other favorite spot is I want to say it's shortly after. Trying to remember where exactly it's at. It's after you and Nadine have your big blow up fight. After Chloe and Nadine have their big blow up fight, and you have to fight your way back to her, fight your way back to like kind of reconvene with her, and you have to, it's raining, it's pouring. The old man story. No, it's raining. It's dark outside. There's a couple soldiers around, but there's that SUV, that armored SUV that keeps going up and down and all around. And you know what I'm talking about? You
Yeah,
know that
yeah.
section?
hmm
And you have to find C4, plant it on the ground, and time and trigger it when the SUV drives over it.
Yeah, and there's another added bit in there where, like, it's not something that I actually took advantage of, but there would be lightning, and then you would hear a thunder crash like a second later. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
pretty sure you can use that to cover your gunfire without them knowing that you're shooting at them.
Really?
I haven't tested it because that's in one of the lock boxes you can find a silenced pistol. So like that's what I was running around with. But I'm like
Yeah.
relatively sure if you had like a sniper or something, you could be timing it with the lightning and just like popping guys off without them being aware, which is a super cool touch when you're in like a storm like that.
I agree. I just that area I like the most because it feels like it combines all of your stealth skills into one kind of task. Like that is a good example of a boss that's not a boss. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
not like you are fighting it mano a mano or something like that. You just kind of you have to sneak around, plant bombs, and it just I don't know. I love that it kind of gave you that culmination of stealth. That was your stealth boss. It almost feels like this game has segments where this is your boss. This is like the boss section for this skill that you've obtained throughout the course of playing this game. Like this is the boss section for your stealth. This is the boss section for hand-to-hand combat, which is a SOV. This is the boss section for shooting, which I would argue is the train because it's a lot of cover-based shooting and
hmm
timing, and you're throwing a lot of different types of enemies all at once, and you have to figure it out as you go. So I kind of like how towards the end of the game they they throw you three bosses essentially, but they're not actually bosses. Like Asav is really the only boss, like stereotypical boss. I will say though that SUV is kind of like a boss because it's very Mario-esque in the three hits and you kill it type of thing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So what I did in that, I went all around the outskirts, picking up as much C4 as possible, and then
Mm-hmm.
I climbed up the tower and killed the guy at the top who had an RPG.
Yeah.
Then I chucked a C4 down onto the floor, waited for the car to come across, and then I hit the C4 and the RPG, and it just blew up. I guess the RPG counts as like two C4s, but it was like, yeah, eat it.
That kind of fantastic, actually. I one of the other things I love about video games, reason I love video games number 5 billion and one is just the very differences. Like I wouldn't have thought to do that. That's such a great. I love those kinds of stories. It's kind of like I think we might have told it before, like maybe years ago, but like when we were playing WoW together and we did that rocket shoot jump across the one dungeon. Do you remember that?
Mm, I know that I have done the like rocket boots and parachute cloak jumps, but I'm not remembering exactly the time that you were talking
So,
about.
I mean, I know this is kind of a tangent. I thought of it because it's one of those stories where it's like, this is something crazy that happened to me during a video game, and your story of how you destroyed the SUV, not the SUV, but the armored car in this just kind of reminded me of it. But the story I'm thinking about, when we were playing WoW the one time, we were going through. It was it was during Lich King, and we were going through some of those old Nilla dungeons. And there was it might have been like one of the Black Rocks, like either Upper or Lower Black Rock Spire or like Black Rock Depths or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
And there's like this room where there is a big, like the path goes around the wall around the outside, but the one part of the path is fairly a decent amount higher than the other side of it, like on the opposite end of the room. But they're connected by hugging the wall. So what we did was we threw on the rocket boots and the parachute cloak, and we turned on the rocket boots, ran and jumped off, and at the height of our jump we hit the cloak, and while the rocket boots were still going, it propelled us across the way, so we completely skipped the entire room. I don't think you made it though. I'm pretty sure you died and I made it.
Yeah, those can be a little dodgy when you're trying to do that. But
but anyway, I know that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It was a funny gaming story. It just kind of reminded me of it. But okay. So what would you say are some of the biggest differences between this game and Uncharted 4? One of the things that I was kind of watching some behind the scenes stuff they were saying they were trying to do was make this game a culmination of everything they had learned in the Uncharted series so far. So what do you think are the biggest differences between this game and some of the previous entries in the series?
well, I would say right off, like the biggest improvement that they made was to their more open world sections. Um,
Yes, I would agree with that.
yeah, I thought it was a cool idea that they added them in Uncharted 4. But most of the time it was just like you're driving the truck and then you're hopping out for a minute or so and then you're driving the truck again, and it's like it was cool as a showcase for like what the PS4 can do, and like it's
Hmm.
really pretty and interesting, and there's like a bit of storytelling from listening to like Nate and Elena talk about whatever they're seeing. But gameplay wise, it was just like it's still a linear game that you're going through, and you're
Yeah.
still trying to get from point A to point B, even if there's just like random stuff kind of scattered around in front of you on your way.
Hmm.
And I feel like in Lost Legacy, it made it much more of a sandbox when they opened the world up for you, where it wasn't you're going from here to there. It was like, here's a map, there's a bunch of shit you can do on it, like do it however you want. And like, depending on which little temple thing you do first, there might be like a different voice line when they're looking towards the other temples to be like, "Oh, we did that one already," or "Oh, look at that. That's got like that same marking that we're looking for." And I don't know,
Yeah,
I just thought that kind of stuff is much more interesting than just being like, "Hey, look how big the world is. Use your Jeep to just get past it all."
I think you said it perfectly, man. I honestly, I agree with you entirely, man. I think you nailed it spot on. The open world segment in this is a lot better than Uncharted 4, and it feels a lot more. I think what I like about this game is that it doesn't overstay its welcome. Like, it's a nice solid length of a game. It doesn't feel too long. It's what, like 8 hours or so, not even. And it's a really nice short experience, but not too short. It's just the perfect length. Because a lot of times in Uncharted games, at some point I just get to a point where I'm like, oh my god, are we done yet? And even though I like it, sometimes it feels drawn out, and it's never like an exasperated thing. I'm like, I can't believe it's not done. Why is it not done? It's more just kind of like, I wish it was over, but I'm so close. I know it, so I need to keep playing. This game doesn't feel like that. It feels like it's the perfect length for what it set out to be. Yeah, so I mean, I really don't have much else to add to that. So I guess to wrap this up, let's do, because we finished the Uncharted games now, with the exception of Golden Abyss, which Naughty Dog did not develop. That's for the PS Vita. It was developed by Bend Studios, I believe.
Hmm.
And So what would you say is your your ranking? I don't want to say definitive because we'll go with our subjective rankings of Uncharted games. What is your least favorite? And if you did you beat Golden Abyss at all?
I own it, and it has been sitting on my shelf for several years. I played, I think, the first like 2 levels, and I'm not as good with the tiny little Vita joysticks as I am the PS4 joysticks, so I kind of just stopped.
Fair enough. Fair
a
enough.
a lot of that though is because I got sidetracked with Persona 4, and then I just kind of never went back to it. So,
Okay.
if that's something you want to cover later, then I will play it.
We might once we finish up all the Naughty Dog stuff because there's still Crash Bandicoot to talk about. There's still Jack and Daxter to talk about. But in any case, so we'll keep Golden Abyss out of our ranking for now since you haven't finished it. So, what is your ranking of the Uncharted games from least favorite to your favorite?
That's tough.
I can give you mine if you want to think about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
For me, it is Uncharted 3 is my least favorite, which, once again, not to say that it's bad. It's, just like, what's an expression? Like, the worst day fishing is still better than the best day working. You know what I mean?
Sure,
it's still a
yeah,
great game. But Uncharted 3 is my bottom of the list. Then I would probably do Uncharted 1. And then I would probably get in there Uncharted 4. Then Lost Legacy, and then Uncharted 2.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking that's about the same as me. I would maybe put like 1 and 4 pretty equal footing because like 1 has its own charming little like self-contained story that I really really like. But I couldn't say if I like it more or less than 4. But other than that, I mean, yeah, 3rd at the lowest, not because it's a terrible game, just because I don't think it's as good as the other ones. And 2 is still my favorite, but Lost Legacy did a really good job building on 4, but I don't think that for me it surpassed 2 just yet.
Yeah, I agree. Once again, I think 2 is the one. I think we mentioned it in the episode we recorded almost 2 years ago now on it, but I think Uncharted 2 is the only Uncharted game that really nailed a final boss fight. Like that really completely took a boss fight like in its classic form and actually made it work for an Uncharted game versus every other game is either some type of quick time event or a hybrid of that, which I would say Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy here just kind of like a hybrid of quick time event and actual, skill type of thing. So that should do it for this episode of Still Loading and for this episode on Uncharted. We have finished up all the Uncharted games, at least that Naughty Dog developed. Like we said, there's still Golden Abyss, and technically there's a mobile game that we can play too, a Treasure Hunter or Fortune Hunter or something like that. I don't know if I want to do that though.
Yeah, that sounds like a...
It's a card game from what I remember hearing about.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, so Tristan, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Is there anything you want to plug or I believe you don't usually, but is there anything new you want to plug or anything like that?
No, not really. Like I stream a little bit sometimes, but I have like 0 interaction with chat, so I don't know that it's even worth plugging it. So let's just say if you want to find it, then I'm sure that I'll pop up on like the viewers of Josh's channel sometimes also watch this. So if you can figure out who I am, then good on you.
It's a mystery for the listeners. As usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to reach out, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. Probably the easiest and honestly the best way to support it is just give it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use. If you want to support it monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. Even just $1 a month will help grow the show. You can check out my website, stillloadingpodcast.com. And finally, the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of children receiving inpatient care at hospitals. If you want to help them and consider consider donating, you can go to bitbybitfoundation.org. And that will do it for this episode. So once again, Tristan, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
And I will see you all next time.